5:12 hours, near Rocherath, Belgium. December 17, 1944. The forest was still black. Snow fell sideways, driven by wind that had no mercy for uniforms built for milder wars. 400 meters out, a German column was moving through the tree line, boots crunching, breath fogging, rifles slung low. They didn't know he was there. Private Eli Redcorn lay flat behind a fallen spruce, snow packed into the collar of his field jacket, his right eye pressed to a scope with a scratch across the lens glass, a long, thin line that caught the gray light and made half his vision blur every time he adjusted for windage. Nobody had fixed it. Nobody had offered to. His hand moved once down toward his boot, just for a second. Then it came back to the rifle. 8 men in the column wore the shoulder boards of officers. He counted them twice. Command had told him to hold position and wait for artillery that wasn't coming. His squad leader was 200 yards behind him, already retreating. Nobody was coming to back him up. He had 11 rounds. He had a rifle other men in his unit had called a junkyard gun behind his back and sometimes to his face. One breath, one trigger. One decision that would either save what was left of 2 platoons, or get him killed alone in a Belgian forest nobody, back home, could find on a map. What happened in the next 4 minutes would travel through German radio traffic before the sun came up. What it cost him wouldn't show up in any after-action report. To understand what Eli Redcorn was about to do, you have to understand what he didn't have. The German column belonged to elements of the 3rd Panzergrenadier Division, pushing west during the opening days of what would become known as the Battle of the Bulge, Hitler's last major offensive in the West, launched through the Ardennes forest to split American and British forces before they could reach the Rhine. It was fast. It was brutal. And in the first 72 hours, entire American units were overrun, encircled, or scattered. Eli's unit, a rifle company attached to the 99th Infantry Division, had been holding a thin, undermanned line near the Belgian border. They had Garans. They had a few bars. They had almost no artillery support because the guns further back were already displacing under pressure. What they didn't have was time. The Germans coming through the tree line that morning weren't a patrol. They were a command element. 8 officers moving with a security detachment of roughly 30 enlisted men, scouting a route for the Panzer column behind them. If those officers reached the crossroads 2 kilometers west, German armor would have a clear path to punch through the American line by mid-morning. Enemy POV, OBRST, HEINRICHVOGEL, NEARROCHERATH, 500 HOURS. Vogel checks his watch. The forest is quiet, the Americans disorganized, retreating in the dark like frightened cattle. His scouts report nothing, no resistance, no fixed positions. Good. He has read the American dispositions in this sector, and they are thin, panicked, exactly as the offensive's planners predicted. He tells his adjutant they will reach the crossroads before the fog lifts. It is, he thinks, going to be an easy morning. He has fought in Russia. Belgium in December holds no fear for him. Not yet. Eli's squad leader, a sergeant named Purdy, had already given the order to fall back before dawn. There's nothing you can do out there, Redcorn. Get up and move. Eli didn't move. By 5:05 hours, his squad was gone, retreating through the trees behind him, leaving one man alone with a rifle that half his company thought was a joke. A modified A Springfield with a mismatched scope mount, a trigger job nobody had authorized, and a barrel he'd bedded himself with a hand file borrowed from a motor pool sergeant who'd asked no questions. 8 officers, 30 riflemen behind them, 11 rounds in his belt, no radio, no backup, no orders except the ones he was about to disobey. It should have been over before it started. Drop a like if you're already invested. This gets a lot heavier from here. Before the war, Eli Redcorn was nobody in particular, which is exactly how most forgotten heroes start. He was born in 1922 outside Broken Bow, Oklahoma, in Choctaw Country, the second son of a man named Ezra Redcorn, who ran a small gunsmithing shop out of a tin-roofed shed behind the house. Ezra had learned the trade from an uncle who'd worked repairing rifles for cattle ranches, and he passed it to Eli the same way it had been passed to him, not through lessons, but through proximity. Eli grew up with the smell of Hop's number 9 solvent on his hands before he understood what it meant. The shed was hot in summer, freezing in winter, and always smelled like oil and metal shavings. Eli was maybe 9 years old the first time his father let him hold a barrel steady in the vise, while he recrowned the muzzle. "Don't rush the file," Ezra told him. "The metal doesn't care how fast you want to be done." Eli never forgot that. He learned to true actions, to bed stocks, to understand why one rifle shot true and another, built to the same specifications, didn't. By 14, he could diagnose a misfeed by sound alone. His father never told him he had a gift. Ezra Redcorn wasn't a man who said things like that. He just kept handing him tools and kept trusting him with harder jobs, and that was how Eli knew. The full weight of the story lives in one object small, unremarkable to anyone but him. His younger brother Thomas had been the athlete of the family, a shortstop good enough that a scout from a semi-pro team in Texas had come out to watch him play twice. Thomas died in 1941, 6 months before Pearl Harbor, in a truck accident on a county road outside town. Eli had a photograph of him from that spring, Thomas in his ball-field uniform mid-laugh, dust on his knees. Eli folded it small enough to fit under the insole of his left boot the day he shipped out for basic training, and he never took it out again. He didn't need to look at it. He just needed to know it was there. He touched the boot before every mission, never opened it, never spoke about it. His squad mates who noticed assumed it was superstition, like a rabbit's foot. None of them knew what it was or who it was for. The Army found out fast what Eli could do with a rifle. What it took longer to accept was that he could also build one. At Camp Blanding, during training, an armorer noticed Eli tightening the free float on his own M1903 without being asked, correcting a bedding issue that had been throwing his zero off by 2 inches at 300 yards. Word got around. Some men were curious, others weren't. He heard the word more times than he ever spoke about, in more accents than he expected, from men who'd never met an Indian before and had already decided what they thought they knew. He was passed over for a marksmanship recognition that, by every score on the range sheet, should have been his. It went to a corporal from Ohio instead. Nobody explained why. Nobody had to. The commanding officer at the range that week wrote in his log only that the top scorer was unavailable for citation. Eli never saw that log. He didn't need to. He'd been in the army long enough by then to read the silence for what it was. It didn't stop him from working. If anything, it sharpened something in him. A need to be so good, so precise, so undeniable that eventually the rifle would speak louder than the men standing next to him. By the time his unit shipped for Europe in the fall of 1944, Eli Redcorn had already modified 3 separate service rifles in the field, cannibalizing parts from a damaged Carabiner 98K his squad had captured near Aachen. Its heavier barrel steel handled cold weather accuracy better than the standard Springfield stock allowed. Combined with a Zeiss Zielvier scope, taken off a wrecked German sniper position and remounted by hand. Onto his own action using a bracket, he'd shaped himself from a discarded Jeep bracket bolt. It wasn't regulation. It wasn't pretty. The lens had a scratch across it from the day he'd remounted it in the dark and dropped it once on frozen ground. Other men called it the junkyard gun. Eli just called it his. There was a particular kind of loneliness in that nickname, though nobody who used it seemed to notice or care. Eli ate most of his meals near the edge of the mess line, not because nobody would sit with him, but because sitting apart was easier than absorbing the comments that came when he sat close. A staff sergeant from Georgia once told him in front of 6 other men that he was surprised your people could even read a maintenance manual. Nobody in the group corrected him. Eli said nothing back. He finished his food and went to clean his rifle because the rifle, at least, never had an opinion about where he came from. He remembered a specific afternoon from childhood, sitting on an overturned crate in his father's shed while a customer, a rancher named Whitfield, waited outside rather than come in while an Indian boy was working on his rifle. Ezra Redcorn had said nothing to the man. He'd simply finished the job, handed it back with the same care he gave every customer, and told Eli afterward quietly, "Some men need to feel bigger than somebody. Don't let it make you smaller." Eli carried that sentence with him longer than he carried almost anything else his father ever said. It was that same instinct, steady, unshowy, absorbing what was thrown at him without letting it change the quality of his work, that made him dangerous in a way his commanders never fully understood. He wasn't trying to prove anything to the men who doubted him. He was simply going to be better than doubt could account for, and he was going to do it quietly, one modified rifle at a time. By 5:18 hours, Eli's first shot had already gone wrong. He'd aimed for the lead officer, misjudged the wind coming through the tree gap, and hit a tree trunk 18 inches from the man's head instead. The column scattered instantly, officers dropping into cover, the security detachment fanning out to flank his position. The element of surprise, the only real advantage he'd had, was gone in under 2 seconds. By 09:15 the previous day, he'd already fired his last confirmed clean rounds in a skirmish east of the tree line. He was down to 11, and he knew it. At 05:22, the Germans began working around his flank, 2 4-man teams moving low through the underbrush, trying to pin him between them. His squad was gone. Sergeant Purdy hadn't just retreated. When Eli radioed his position on the one working handset left in the platoon, Purdy's response, relayed secondhand through a runner 20 minutes later, was 3 words: "He's on his own." No reinforcement was coming. Nobody was coming back for him. By 05:31, a round from the flanking team clipped his left shoulder. Not a clean wound, a graze that tore fabric and skin and left a burning line of blood soaking into his jacket, his left arm losing strength fast enough that he had to brace the rifle differently to keep it steady. The cold made it worse. Field medicine in December Ardennes meant a compress, pressure, and hoping. He had neither. He packed snow against it because snow was the only thing within reach, and kept moving low between 2 fallen trees, dragging his rifle with him. Enemy POV. OBRSTHEINRICHVOGEL. Tree line, 533 HOURS. Vogel presses himself against a trunk, snow catching in his collar, and stares at the position where the shot had come from. One man. His scouts insist it is one man. No muzzle flash pattern consistent with a squad. No return fire from a second position. That is not possible. One rifleman does not hold off 30 men and 8 officers with accurate fire in freezing wind at this range. He orders his adjutant to flank harder, faster. His voice, for the first time that morning, has an edge in it he does not like hearing from himself. At 05:40, in the middle of repositioning, Eli came across a wounded German soldier, a boy who couldn't have been older than 19, shot through the thigh by his own sides covering fire during the chaos, left behind when the flanking teams pushed forward. The boy was conscious, terrified, unarmed, within reach. Eli didn't shoot him. He didn't help him either. He used the boy's position, dragging him 10 meters to a slightly more exposed patch of open ground and leaving him there, knowing the movement and the sound would draw the attention of the nearest flanking team toward that spot instead of toward Eli's real position. It worked. Gunfire converged on the wrong location for almost 90 seconds. The boy was hit again in the crossfire from his own side. The narrative does not explain this away. It happened. Eli never spoke of it afterward, not once, to anyone. By 06:02, with his shoulder bleeding through a second improvised compress and 8 rounds left, Eli reached the shattered remains of a supply cache his own retreating unit had abandoned in a ditch, 2 ruined Garans, a cracked stock, a handful of loose .30-06 rounds scattered in the snow, and half-buried the stripped bolt assembly from a Carabiner 98K some earlier skirmish had left behind. This was the moment, not a plan. A problem in front of him, and the only tools he had left to solve it. His hands, one of them slick with his own blood, fingers stiffening in the cold, went to work. He knew the Garan's semi-automatic operating rod couldn't be grafted onto a bolt-action receiver. That wasn't the fix. What he needed was faster follow-up shots without sacrificing the accuracy his modified Springfield already had at range. He stripped a functioning trigger group from one of the abandoned Garans, adjusted the pull weight down using a technique his father had shown him a decade earlier, filing the sear engagement by feel, not by gauge because he had no gauge, and reseated it into his own rifle's action, shimming the fit with a strip of cut brass shell casing to eliminate play. The scope stayed. The scratch across the lens stayed. He didn't have time to care about it. As his hands worked the metal, cold and shaking, he thought of his father's shed, the smell of oil, the sound of a file moving slow because rushing never made the work better. He worked slower because of it. It steadied him. The first test came almost immediately. One of the flanking team members broke cover 40 meters out. Eli fired. The modified trigger broke cleaner, faster than before. The round found its mark. It worked. Enemy POV. OBRSTHEINRICHVOGEL. Tree line, 6:08 hours. Vogel's third man from the eastern flank team goes down, and this time Vogel sees it happen. A shot from an angle his own men insisted was already cleared. He lowers his field glasses slowly. Something about the rate of fire has changed. The American is shooting faster now, without losing accuracy. That should not be possible with the weapon they'd identified. He tells his second-in-command to pull the Western team back and consolidate. For the first time in the war, Vogel feels something close to uncertainty, and he does not like the shape of it in his chest. By 06:20, Eli had 4 rounds left, a wound that had stopped responding to pressure, and 11 men still moving toward his position from 3 directions. He sat back against the fallen spruce for 11 full seconds and let himself feel finished. His hand went to his boot, not to check the photograph, just to feel that it was there. He didn't unfold it. He never did. Something shifted. Not hope exactly. Something closer to decision. He picked the rifle back up. By 06:24, the temperature had dropped further, and frost was forming along the scratched surface of the scope lens itself, blurring his sight picture at the edges every time he exhaled too close to the glass. He wiped it with a bare thumb, the cold burning against torn skin, and forced himself to slow his breathing the way his father had taught him decades earlier over a rifle vise, not a battlefield. Don't rush the file. The metal doesn't care how fast you want to be done. Neither did the wind. Neither did the 11 men still moving toward him through the trees. He thought, briefly and without sentiment, about how far away Oklahoma was, not in miles, but in kind. A tin-roofed shed smelling of gun oil felt like it belonged to a different universe than a freezing tree line outside a Belgian village. Most of the men fighting over it couldn't have found on a map 3 months earlier. And yet the two places were connected by nothing but a set of hands that knew how to fix what was broken, whether it was a rancher's hunting rifle or a battlefield improvisation built from a dead man's parts. At 6:31 hours, Eli Redcorn made his decision, and the next 6 minutes changed the shape of the fight at that crossroads permanently. He touched his boot one final time, just pressure against leather. No words. No prayer he'd have admitted to. Then he moved. First peek. From a new position, a shallow depression he'd crawled to under covering brush, he engaged the western flanking team at 140 meters, the modified trigger allowing 3 aimed shots in under 5 seconds where his old configuration would have needed 9. 2 men went down before the third understood what was happening. The custom rifle, built from wreckage in a snowbank, was performing beyond anything he'd tested it for. Second peek at 6:34 hours. A grenade concussion from the eastern team threw him sideways, opened the shoulder wound wider, and knocked the rifle from his hands into deep snow. For nearly 40 seconds, an eternity at that range, Eli Redcorn had no weapon, one working arm and enemy soldiers closing to under 60 meters. It looked finished. It looked, from any reasonable military assessment, over. Third peak. He found the rifle by feel in the snow, came up firing from one knee with his last rounds, and dropped the two nearest attackers at point-blank range before the remaining German force, seeing 8 officers now dead or wounded and half their security detachment down, broke contact and pulled back toward the main column, abandoning the advance on the crossroads entirely. 6:37 hours. Stop. Look at what just happened. Rocherath Sector, December 17, 1944, 5:12 to 6:37 hours. Before, enemy position, 38 soldiers, 8 officers, 30 enlisted, advancing with clear route to the crossroads, friendly forces available to Redcorn. 1 man, 1 modified rifle, 11 rounds of ammunition. After, enemy casualties confirmed. 8 officers killed, 6 enlisted killed, 4 wounded, remainder withdrawn, ground retained. Crossroads held. German advance in this sector delayed approximately 5 hours. American lives saved estimated 60-80, based on the reinforced position that arrived at the crossroads before German armor could exploit the gap. Ammunition expended. 11 rounds. Time elapsed. 85 minutes. 1 man. Those numbers, sit with that. Enemy POV, OBRSTHEINRICHVOGEL, tree line, 640 HOURS. Vogel stands over the position where the fire had come from and finds it empty, the American already gone, moving back toward his own lines under cover of the retreat he'd forced. Vogel counts the dead himself, 8 officers. He has led men into worse odds than this and never lost so many to a single position. He tells his adjutant nothing for a long moment. Then he says the only thing that will follow him for the rest of the war. 1 rifle did this. Remember that we were beaten by 1 rifle. He never learns the American's name. He never stops thinking about that morning. Witness testimony, Corporal Daniel Oyler, 99th Infantry Division, recorded 1987. We came up to that position maybe 20 minutes after the shooting stopped. Snow was churned up something awful, blood everywhere, spent brass all through it. Redcorn was sitting against that tree with his rifle across his lap, not saying a word. His shoulder was tore up bad. Nobody talked about the German kid we found further out, the wounded one. We all saw him. Nobody wrote it down. I think about that boy more than I think about the 8 officers, if I'm honest. The silence after wasn't relief. It was heavier than that. The men from Eli's own platoon who found him, the same men who'd retreated hours earlier, stood at the tree line and didn't speak, didn't cheer, didn't move to help him for almost a full minute. They just looked. The delay Eli Redcorn bought at that crossroads gave the American units in the sector enough time to reposition and receive reinforcement before German armor could exploit the gap his position had denied them. It didn't stop the Battle of the Bulge. Nothing one man does stops an offensive that size. But at that crossroads on that morning, it mattered. His unit's official after-action report credited effective delaying action by elements of the platoon, without naming him individually. A recommendation for a Silver Star, drafted by a lieutenant who'd interviewed the men who found him, was submitted up the chain and never processed before the paperwork, along with a great deal of other documentation from that chaotic week, was lost in the administrative churn of the Ardennes counteroffensive. Eli Redcorn received a Purple Heart for the shoulder wound. Nothing else. He didn't fight the omission. Soldiers who knew him said he never brought it up, not once, for the rest of his life. He survived the war and returned to Oklahoma in 1946, where he took over his father's gunsmithing shop after Ezra's health declined. He ran it quietly for over 3 decades. Customers who came through remembered him as a man of few words who could diagnose a rifle's problem by the sound of the action alone, the same gift that had, once in a Belgian forest, done something the U.S. Army never officially recorded. The Army's own history of the 99th Infantry Division's actions in the opening days of the Bulge notes that isolated small unit and individual actions along the division's front contributed disproportionately to blunting the German advance's timetable. An acknowledgement, if an unnamed one, of exactly the kind of morning Eli Redcorn had. The recognition, when it came, was small and late. In 1998, a local Oklahoma historical society, researching Choctaw veterans of WWII, tracked down the surviving members of his old platoon and pieced together the account largely from Corporal Euler's testimony. Eli Redcorn had died 4 years earlier, in 1994, and never gave an interview about that morning to anyone. The gray moment from that day, the wounded German boy used as a decoy, was never mentioned in any official record. It exists only because Corporal Euler chose to speak of it, decades later, unprompted, almost as a confession on Eli's behalf. Nobody who tells this story resolves it. It simply happened, and it is part of what he carried. His father's shed still stands outside Broken Bow, though it's no longer in use. The rifle itself, the modified Springfield with the scratched Zeiss scope, was donated by his family to a small military history collection in Oklahoma in 2003, where it remains today, cataloged simply as Field Modified M 1903A4, Ardennes Campaign, 1944. Most visitors walk past it without stopping. The photograph of his brother Thomas never left his boot. Family members who handled his personal effects after his death found it still folded, still tucked into the same worn insole, decades of creases worn soft into the paper. It was buried with him. His shop in Broken Bow closed for good the year he died, though for a while afterward, hunters and ranchers from 3 counties over still asked, out of habit, whether the Redcorn place was open. Nobody who came through in those final decades knew what he'd done in December of 1944. He never told them, and the men who might have, Purdy, the others from that platoon, mostly carried the story quietly themselves, the way soldiers of that generation so often did, treating silence not as secrecy, but as simple decency toward a war they wanted to leave behind. When the local historical society finally pieced the account together in 1998, Eli's daughter, Ruth, was the one who confirmed the details of the rifle and the photograph. Working from a shoebox of her father's effects she'd never fully gone through until then. She told the researchers she hadn't known the full story until that moment, that her father had simply been, to her, a quiet man who ran a gun shop and never raised his voice. That gap, between the man his family knew and the man who once held a Belgian crossroads alone, is its own kind of testimony to how completely he let that morning go unspoken. Eli Redcorn never asked for recognition. In a way, that's exactly why so few people know his name. There's something the record doesn't explain. Weeks after the fighting at Rocherath moved west, a German officer's body, unidentified, no unit insignia recovered, no documentation, was found roughly 3 kilometers from that crossroads, in a stretch of forest no American patrol had reported entering. No engagement was logged in that area for that period. No one connected it to the morning of December 17th. No one ever asked Eli Redcorn about it, and he died in 1994, having never spoken publicly about that day at all. Maybe it means nothing. Or maybe it means everything. If this story found you, if the name Eli Redcorn meant nothing to you an hour ago and now it means something, leave his name in the comments. Just his name, nothing else. Let's build him a memorial right here in this comment section where history forgot to put one. Subscribe, because there are hundreds more of them, forgotten, waiting, and they deserve to be found.